Hello everyone and welcome to the Nissan EV Owners Group channel. I'm Paul Eden. Today we're joined by the creator of YouTube's Plug Live Television, Dr. Euan McTurk. From Oxford to Harry at what university, Euan has written and co-authored such tomes as, and I'm reading this, Degradation Diagnostics for Lithium-Ion Cells, and this is the good one, I like this one, minimally invasive insertion of reference electrodes into commercial lithium-ion pouch cells. That's a cracker, isn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'll tell you what. There were many pouch cells who found out how you don't do that successfully before we found the ones that you could do that successfully too. There was something of a lithium-ion graveyard by the time we were done with them. But hey, now we got that technique nailed down. It's very handy for opening up that black box that is a lithium-ion cell and finding out just what the true performance limits and the degradation mechanisms are.
Brilliant. Well, it's over my head, but that completely illustrates why people like Dr. McTurk are important to the world of EVs and renewable energy. Dr. McTurk is an electric vehicle battery electrochemist and has both intellectual and practical experience in the field. Euan, thank you for taking the time to come and talk to us. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite.
I read, shameless plug, incoming, I read David Twohig's book, Inside the Machines. Brilliant. Really, very highly recommend this. And in this book, he describes how his father got him tinkering into cars with an early age. Andy Palmer, former boss of Nissan and Aston Martin, tells a similar story of his apprenticeships. You didn't start in cars, though, did you?
Well, no, it was all a bit of a chance encounter, really. Although it was actually a car that resulted in the career path that I've ended up on. So, yeah, I was at the University of Dundee doing my applied physics degree called renewable energy. That was in the kind of mid to late 2010s, when people would laugh at you, when they heard that you were doing anything to do with renewable energy, and you knew, well, I'm playing the long game, which isn't even going to be that long a game. Wait and see. And I was going into my honours year. I was trying to decide what I wanted to do for my honours project. And the person who would become my project supervisor pulled up literally just right next to me outside the physics building in a 1999 Peugeot 106 electric with NiCad
Oh,
batteries.
this is the,
So
yes, I've read about this.
yeah, I had no idea that they existed, but yeah, it turns out they did. So PSA, before Stellantis was PSA, it was just
Yes,
Peugeot and Citroën.
yeah.
They built about 10,000 NiCad powered 106s, Saxos, Berlingos, and partner vans between about 1995 and 2005. Very few of them made it to the UK, especially in right-hand drive, and most of the ones that did come to the UK were council pool cars. They only leased them to businesses. I
Mm.
did hear of one person who set up a fake business just to get their hands on the vehicle. So yeah, which is a pretty shrewd move, I would say. Most of them ended up being repatriated by PSA, but a few of them slipped the net somehow and ended up at auctions. So yeah, that one, as I said, ended up being procured by the University of Dundee, and I thought immediately, okay, this is interesting. This is something I want to be involved in. And I started researching next generation battery chemistries as a result of that. Did a lot of work with the vehicle, and ended up buying it off the university when I left as well. That became my daily commuter when I was going across the Tay Bridge to St Andrews
Yes.
to Peter Bruce's research group. He was one of the leading researchers in lithium air batteries, which are a breathing battery.
Mm.
Probably has more in common with a fuel cell than a lithium ion cell. It's kind of almost a hybrid between the two. Very ethical, very low cost, cheap materials, 10 times increase in energy density, and is now in the Grampian Transport Museum awaiting its next adventure. But yeah, I didn't choose the Plug Life. The Plug Life chose me. It literally drove
Yes,
up next
quite.
to me. And that was the car that launched my career, because it was the one that made me realize, if this is how good the tech was 10 years ago in 2009 versus 1999, which was the age of the car, imagine what it will be like in 10 years time. And right enough, 10 years later to the month, I took delivery of my 2015 Tesla Model S, which already had 90,000 miles on the clock at that point,
Oh my God.
and that's still my daily driver today.
That Peugeot, that had a tartan interior. I've seen that. That was quite something.
Oh
Did
yeah, yeah.
you rocked that? Did you?
I did indeed, yeah. I mean, it is such a kind of old man interior, but I freaking love it. It's the best interior of any car I've ever owned. And you look at a lot of modern vehicles these days, we've been through a really boring era of vehicle
Oh,
design and interior trim,
oh
and it's like,
goodness me,
would
I,
you?
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, it's so yawn worthy, and I've been quite lucky with most of the EVs I've owned. So obviously there was the 106 with the tartan interior. There was the other 106 electric, also with tartan interior, but then I decided owning two of them was a bit silly. Mark One Honda Insight in that citrus kind of greeny yellow color with matching lime green bucket seats. The Model S I've got has the short-lived light grey interior that I think actually kind of suits it quite well. It's better than just the kind of boring black leather and anything like that. But yeah, I've been very lucky to have, just by sheer chance, because these were used cars and
Yeah.
beggars can't be choosers. Very lucky to have interesting interior. But then there was my Leaf, which was just the kind of boring black cloth seats. There, just nearly falling asleep every time I was looking around it. I can't stand how dull cars got. And then the Honda E came along with its incredible interior, and I was like,
It's an
yes,
amazing car.
finally.
I saw one at Fully Charged South. It's such a marvelous, marvelous. I'm a big fan of Hondas. I've been a Honda owner, and the Honda is really, really good inside and out. It's such a fabulous car.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. And if it had double the energy density of batteries in there, and I reckon, I mean, I've yet to have this officially confirmed, but I've got my contacts working on it. I reckon that the cells that they're using are probably from about the mid 2010s. They've not really been updated to the latest chemistry. And if you were to just swap them over for identical cells with the latest chemistry, you could probably have a 200-mile range EV. That wouldn't solve the problem that it realistically maxes out at about 35 kilowatts on the rapid charger.
Yeah.
But if you solve that as well, then absolutely that's going on my driveway, because I love small, practical cars that have personality, and that is the Honda E.
It is. I was very impressed with it. It's a city car though, so perhaps a couple of hundred miles is plenty. Tell us about your Leaf, because my generation one 2015 is just the other side, just outside here. Tell us about yours.
Well, I've actually had a couple of Leafs now, but the
Oh
one that
right,
people know from well, actually, they're both on YouTube actually, but one of them is on there in stealth mode, which was my white 24 kilowatt hour Nissan
yeah.
Leaf with the black cloth interior. I was disappointed that they hadn't kept on the cream interior, or as I call it, the Alan Partridge interior, because it looks more executive.
They were
They
the
hadn't
Japanese
updated.
built ones, weren't they?
They were. I no, that said, some of the Sunderland ones have cream interior
Oh,
too. So
okay.
the way to tell it, aside from the age, is that if it has a foot-operated parking brake, but has cream interior, it's one of those rare Sunderland built ones. If it's got the
Ah,
electronic parking brake, then it's Japanese.
didn't
Very,
know
very
that.
rare. Yeah, most people went for black cloth interior because they're practical, and things like children and dogs destroy cream interior cars.
Yes, mine's black, but
So
mine's black cloth. I didn't own it, but the guy who I bought it from, it's three children, same as me, and yeah, he
yeah,
bought it for a good reason.
fair point. Fair point. Whereas with me, it was all about the slightly different aesthetics, and the practicalities of it just kind of flew out the window. But yeah, so I took on Busby because sadly my 106 electric, which had been updated to lithium iron phosphate batteries,
Oh,
suffered. Yeah, it was retrofitted around about 20. When would that have been? 2012, 2013.
oh, okay.
And it did a great job. It was a cracking car. But unfortunately, it ended up parked on a very steep hill in a very rainy west of Scotland, and the bolt-on lithium-ion battery management system, uh, which had been added as part of the kind of Heath Robinson retrofit, the weatherproof cover had come off of that, and the
Oh,
rainwater got through the bonnet, shorted the BMS, and bricked the battery pack. So that was retired. The batteries were retired way before their time. But the rest of the car still works fine. The guts of it, if you were to put NiCad batteries back in it, it would still work. And then I was going to have my Mark One Honda Insight for cross country journeys. But as I say, the 106 faced a premature sabbatical from active use, and ended up in a couple of. This is the second museum it's been in just now. It's doing a Scotland tour of Transport Museum. So I was like, okay, what's a practical, affordable EV to take on? This would have been May 2017. And the Nissan Leaf was the obvious choice because it's mechanically reliable. It had a decent enough range, and it just had a kind of decent write up. So, and also enough of them had been on the market, had been around enough to kind of depreciate to the point that I could afford one at the time.
yes, yes,
Uh,
quite. Me too. Me too.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I took on Busby. It actually came from Edinburgh College, so it didn't travel too far to get to me. I'm sure quite a lot of you will know Bob Murphy from EV Circle. So he was the fleet manager there at the time, and he knew the exact one. He knew the exact health it was in and stuff. I was like, oh yeah, that's a good one. Get that. So yeah, I bought that through Eco Cars. Big shout out to Jonathan
Oh, the
Porterfield up
fella in
Norton.
Orkney. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
he's doing some amazing work. We've got a lot of people who got a lot to thank from him. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think EcoCars has now sold about 1,000 EVs, and to be honest, I'm surprised they didn't smash through that barrier ages ago. Anyway, so I drove Busby back home, and that became my daily commuter. But not just that. Despite being a 24 kilowatt hour Leaf and therefore having a realistic 60 to 80 mile range,
Mm.
it ended up going from Edinburgh as far south as Leeds, and of course, for viewers of Plug Live Television, all the way up to Skye and all the way around this beautiful remote island, the Isle of Skye. And we
I,
didn't really have any
I've
issues at all.
I've seen it. It was fabulous. You could have taken any car there, and it would have been fabulous. In fairness.
Oh yeah, yeah. Skye is just such an incredible place.
Mm.
Strongly recommend it, but don't go there in a camper van. You're just going to clog the roads. And also make sure that you don't just nip across the Skye Bridge to Portree and go, "Oh, I've been to Skye." No, no. What you want to do is spend at least a week exploring every last inch of that place because it's utterly incredible. And speak to the locals and sample the local cuisine. Make sure you go to
Very
Talisker
much.
Distillery, of course. It's an incredible place. So yeah, it's a two-parter episode on Plug Live Television that is half what's it like with a short range EV going on grand adventures, and half, oh my god, this place is freaking incredible. So
It's
yeah, yeah,
it's one of my favourite YouTube experiences. Those two programs, I love them.
very kind of you. Thank you very much. There is actually footage of an electric road trip in the Tesla to the Outer Hebrides. We covered all of the islands of the Outer Hebrides earlier this year. But yeah, so in terms of Busby, it very much proved itself to be an incredibly capable machine. And then, as a result, the Mark One Honda Insight sat at the back of the driveway and seized up on multiple occasions. And eventually, I went, you know what, you're going into a transport museum too. So the Leaf was such a the shortest range Leaf on the market was such a versatile EV that it retired my super efficient hybrid, which does 70 miles per gallon at 70 miles an hour without even trying, because it was cheaper, it was more enjoyable to drive, and it was more reliable to go for the Leaf over the Insight. So that says something, because the Insight is a joyous little car as well.
I've never driven one. My Leafs are 30, and on a good day I can get 80 or 90 depending on. It's only got 10 bars, 10 health bars. So yeah, it's 70,000 miles. So it's by no means a spring chicken, but yeah, I'm pleased with it.
Well, true.
Can we talk about charging,
Yeah.
with a particular focus on our Nissans and lithium-ion manganese? What's the best practice for keeping these things in tip-top condition, and how should we manage the trade-off between charge cycles and keeping to the 80/20 rule when, if particularly, the range is so short?
Well, the good news about charge cycles versus only charging to 80% is that this whole thing about, oh, the battery life is so many cycles or so many years or so many 100,000 miles. It's not really necessarily that. Mileage is just a number to electric vehicles, and they are proving themselves to be quite resilient when it comes to how you charge them. But the Nissan Leaf is particularly sensitive about it, and that's mainly because of its lack of a thermal management system. It doesn't have any liquid cooling to keep the batteries cool. So a lot of Leafs do get used as taxis because they're reliable, but
Yeah.
because they're constantly on the road or being rapid charged, they don't have time for that heat to naturally dissipate. And that causes the problem, especially for the 40 kilowatt hour Leaf with rapid gate, which possibly you've covered already on a previous episode, but that's where because of the amount of heat that's building up in the battery during successive rapid charges, and because the battery management system doesn't have a thermal management system to remove that heat, all it can do is reduce the maximum rapid charging speed to about that of a Renault Zoe, down about 22 kilowatts. So it goes into Zoe simulator mode and takes 2 hours to rapid charge. And that is a major nuisance, but it also reduces the lifespan of the battery by keeping it at elevated temperatures for so
Yeah.
long. And that's an issue. So, if you've got a 40 kilowatt hour Leaf, don't do too many cross country treks in it, or try not to constantly rapid charge it. But just about the rest of the Leafs are far more resilient, though, when it comes to temperature control, especially the 62, because as far as I can see, it doesn't actually get enough time to get hot. because the distance between rapid charges that you would need with that 200 to 230 mile range is that much greater. It's got
Indeed.
more time for that to naturally dissipate, and also because CHAdeMO, yes, it can do 100 kilowatts, the 62 kilowatt hour Leaf, but find me a 100 kilowatt rapid charger, CHAdeMO rapid charger in the UK. They're
wow.
mainly 50.
There's,
Okay.
There's a BP Pulse not far from me, Beaconsfield, and they've got a 100 kilowatt charger, CHAdeMO,
Hey.
and I used it with my Leaf. Obviously, mine's a 30 kilowatt. It went at 47, regardless of which one I used. But their one does. It's been there for a year or so. So yes, it's rare, but they are there.
Intriguing.
And of course, the 62, the
Yeah.
E Plus charges faster, because that can charge. I mean, I've seen them at 77 kilowatts.
Yeah.
That's not bad for that technology. That's pretty respectable.
Well, very true. But even still, when you look at the C rate, so the power in kilowatts over the battery capacity in kilowatt hours, that's not too bad. And especially because most CHAdeMO rapid chargers will top out at about 50 kilowatts versus your 62 kilowatt hours capacity. That's less than 1C, so that's fine.
Yes.
The battery's not going to get too hot, which is why the 62 kilowatt hour Leaf is probably going to be a very long-lived battery. What we've found with
Nissan have discontinued it,
which is such a shame.
I know. I'm gutted, because I want one. I'm gutted.
So are they still doing the 40 Leaf in the meantime?
They're all they've done is discontinue the E Plus, which is in Europe is the 62. Well, it's called a 59 now, because they measure it slightly differently. But no, they discontinued it some months ago. I'm absolutely gutted. It's a shame. It's the peak Leaf. I suspect that it was cannibalising sales from the Aria, and don't forget, not long after, the Aria got the new basic entry level trim called Engage, and so perhaps E Plus Leaf was taken away to make room in the lineup for Engage.
Well, if there's any consolation, because I can tell you now that I wouldn't buy a 40 kilowatt hour Leaf new, because the battery is going to degrade itself faster than a 62. But that said, the Leaf is an incredibly mechanically reliable machine. So if it had a decent liquid, if it had a decent liquid cooled battery that would just run and run and run, it would be a tank. It would just be indestructible. So, well, actually, the good news is that there are companies working on aftermarket battery pack upgrades for the Leaf, and I'm not talking about you bring along your own crash salvaged or bought from Nissan 40 kilowatt hour pack and we'll slap it into your existing 40 kilowatt hour Leaf, or upgrade a 24 or a 30 pre-facelift Leaf. No, I'm talking like greater capacity than the Leaf you already have, potentially with liquid cooling as well. And interestingly, there is a company
is that Australian company?
I think there's a New Zealand company.
New Zealand, yes, well done.
Yes.
Yes.
There's also a Scottish company that's working on it as well. So keep an eye on my Twitter, because as soon as that's ready, I'll naturally be shouting it from the rooftops. But
trust me, I'm glued to your Twitter. Trust me.
Excellent. But watch this space, because they have a Leaf as a test mule, and of course, naturally, I've volunteered mine as well. But that is absolutely what we need, because if you think about it. If you are a taxi driver, for example, and you have a Nissan Leaf which could do 150 miles per charge when you got it, it's down to 100 now, then your options are probably buy like an MG5 or something like that, as everybody seems to be doing, or a Nero EV within the taxi trade, which is sort of 20, 30 grand depending on the vehicle you go for, or probably nearer 10 grand tops to swap out the pack in your existing vehicle that you know and love and know that it's incredibly reliable, for something that gives you a massive boost in range, possibly up towards 200 miles per charge with liquid cooling, so that will just run and run and run. What are you going to do? Of course, you're going to go for the financially shrewd option there, and go for the retrofit. That's certainly what I would do.
Me too.
But I mean, in terms of battery healthcare, kind of coming back to a really good point you made about charge cycles versus 80 to 20%. Are you exacerbating that degradation by plugging it in more rather than charging it all the way to 100%? So there was an interesting study that was done many moons. Well, actually not that many moons ago, but it was looking at individual lithium-ion cells in a lab, which doesn't necessarily translate to real-world performance when you've got liquid thermal management systems and all of this. So you got to take lab-based studies with a pinch of salt versus real-world results. But the important thing was that they were charging and discharging lithium-ion cells to different states of charge. So obviously the ones that were going 100% to 0% were the ones that got less cycles out of them. But they found that the ones that were charged to 80% and discharged to just 50% got the most cycles. But and some academics at the time were saying, so I would recommend charging your car to 80% and then discharging it to 50% and then plugging it back in. And I called this out at the time. It's like, what the hell? No, okay, so what's happened here is the academic has failed to translate the results of the study into real life. What they ignored unintentionally was the one where the results for the cells that were charged to 80% and down to about 20%, 25%. They got a little bit less cycles than 80 to 50%. But if you sat down and calculated the energy that was passed through them, so rather than the number of times you plug it in, the number of miles driven.
That's quite
80 to 20% was better. You got more miles out of the battery that way. And that's what I do with my own Tesla now. My Busby, the 24 kilowatt hour Leaf, I had a 50-mile round trip commute, so I would charge it to 100% every night in anticipation of commuting the next day. I wasn't leaving it at 100% for ages. If I was going to be parking it for a long time, I'd take it to 80 and leave it there. But now I've got a Model S with a big battery pack. I charge to 80% typically, and then 100% when I need the range. And I typically plug in somewhere between 50 and 20% state of charge, whatever is convenient for me. So I kind of there's a bit of leniency there, but it's a semi-flexible way of running the vehicle whilst being a battery health freak.
The way I always put it, because I'm often asked in the group, we've got nearly 5,000 members, and there's new people every day. You often get asked, what is the best way to do this? And I'll say absolute best practice is to go for 80-20. However, you do what you need to do. Topping up is one of the worst things you can do. Leaving up at 100, and so you sort of take these things that you must do and you arrange them in order, and then you do the things that you need to do in order to get the car from where you need to be, because that's what cars are for, nothing else.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that said, there is one example of malpractice for a Nissan Leaf in particular that I would strongly advise against, and that is force feeding. So that's when you charge the car up to 100%, leave it plugged in, charging to 100% for a week or so, and then drive it 5 miles down the shops and back. So you've got your one careful retired couple owner. They've probably called the Leaf something like Mabel or Gertrude or something, and and that's their little poodle about to go down the shops. And then they've come back and it's on at the very
98.
most 90%. Yeah, exactly. And they're like, oh, just
plug it back in.
And the Leaf is like, no, don't. It's really struggling with that. The reason being that so a bit of electrochemistry here. The voltage of the individual cells that are connected in series, so positive to negative, to build up the voltage of the battery pack. The individual cell voltages are the potential difference between the positive and the negative electrodes. In other words, the difference in the potential of the positive electrode and the potential of the negative electrode. The negative electrode is your anode, that's made of graphite, and then your positive electrode is the one that's, in the case of the more modern Leafs, it's lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt oxide, NMC. You might have heard that being referred to as. So the potential during charging of the anode, the negative electrode, decreases whilst the positive increases. And that's why you see the cell voltage increase accordingly, and then opposite happens in discharging. But there is a threshold for that potential of the cathode, the positive electrode, above which, as that potential increases, the electrolyte, so the liquid that allows the lithium ions to go between the cells, between the electrodes, I should say, that electrolyte starts to degrade against the positive electrode, the cathode. Because the potential is so high, so it's reached the point where it starts degrading. Incidentally, that doesn't happen in lithium iron phosphate cells. The cell voltage is lower because the cathode potential is lower, and it doesn't go over that threshold. So that's why LFP doesn't mind being charged to 100% routinely. The likes of a newer Tesla Model 3 or Y standard range, or an MG4.
Yeah, some of the MGs have got LFP, haven't they?
BYDs and all of that. Yeah. LFP is really good for a whole bunch of reasons, but Nissan doesn't use them, so we'll stick to NMC just now.
We'll come back to LFP and Nissan in a later question, because I've got something that you may or may not know. That's the end of part 1. In the next part, we talk about battery manufacturing in the UK, solid-state batteries, and we take some questions from the Nissan EV Owners Facebook group. See you all then.